Hang on. What just happened?
I can still hear you, Ramla.
Right. We're just being redirected.
Okay, I'll just be 1 second.
Right, so we're live on Facebook at the moment. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of 2019. This is Amna Qureshi. I'm the co-founder of Women Engineers Pakistan. And I'm really excited for this webinar because this is our first collaborative webinar. And we haven't done anything of this sort for a very long time. So here goes. This is also our first collaborative webinar with a very proficient network of female professionals in Pakistan. It's called the Women in Energy Pakistan. And I would obviously, once we move forward, I would like Namira, who is leading this chapter across the country, to introduce herself. Let me please tell everyone of our audience here that the medium of this webinar is going to be in English. But if there's anything that you are confused in, and if there's any questions that you have, please feel free to type in the comment section. Obviously, as always, we will make sure all the questions are inculcated. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the topic a little bit, and then I'm going to introduce our esteemed speaker, Vic. So we're talking about the market evolution and life cycle emissions within the power sector, and specifically when it comes to LNG and global natural gas, we're talking about the implications of why are we not moving towards alternatives, or what is the impact of the sort of energy use, the sort of fossil fuel use, what are the methane emissions from this sort of gas production systems that are being used for electricity generation. So our esteemed speaker, Dr. Sarah Marie Jordan, is actually an assistant professor of energy, resources, and environment. She's also Canadian Studies Fellow for the Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy at the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, USA. I will quickly read off a description of her many achievements, which will give you all an idea of the breadth of her knowledge, and will also, I hope, encourage you to ask questions, not just regarding the niche topic that we're talking about, but also about her experience as a professional within energy sector. So her research focuses on environmental and economic trade-offs related to energy decisions. She's published quite a lot, and her publications examine life cycle assessment of energy technologies. She also contributes to environmental science, technology innovation, energy policy, etc. She's collaborated with numerous journals, such as the very renowned Nature, Energy Science, Environmental Science, Environmental Science and Technology, and Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews as well. She has been, before she was an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins University, she was also an assistant professor of energy policy and politics at the University of Calgary. She did her postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard, and that was a joint appointment between the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences and the Belfer Center of Science and International Affairs at the Kennedy School of Government. Dr. Jordan has also held positions at the Electric Power Research Institute, at Shell Canada, and the Laboratory on International Law and Regulation at the University of California, San Diego. She earned her PhD in environmental design from the University of Calgary in 2010, and she has a bachelor's degree in physics with a minor in computer science from the Memorial University in 2003. Now that's a very impressive portfolio right there. I'm really, really proud to have you on board, Dr. Jordan. Welcome to this collaborative webinar between SAIS, Johns Hopkins, Women in Energy Pakistan, and Women Engineers Pakistan. Namira, I would give the floor over to you, the virtual floor over to you. Please do introduce yourself. Please do introduce your network. And then we can switch to Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. Again, I share your excitement for this joint collaborative webinar. So just as given the context that 3,600 megawatt capacity of our LNG is being developed in Punjab at present, this conversation today could not be more relevant. Once again, thank you for joining us, Dr. Jordan. I should add that I'm even more thrilled about this webinar because we have a professor joining from my alma mater as a speaker today. A special thanks to SAIS Women Lead and Kent Davis Packard for making the initial connection about 3-4 months ago. So a quick brief about the collaboration. The idea behind this joint webinar came about 4 months ago, I'd say, when Ramla and I first met. The aim and mission behind our network is the same. And we both believe that advancing women through the power of community. So with collaborations, with supporting each other's ventures, with giving advice and critique, mentoring each other, all of it. And then a brief introduction on our network, which is Women in Energy. It was the year before that a few of us women from the energy sector got together and agreed that we needed a network for ourselves, a place to exchange ideas, to build upon each other's work, etc. I work in the Punjab government, so I spoke to my boss, Secretary Energy in Punjab, who, by the way, is a male champion for the cause. It took about half a year to institutionalize it, and I'm so thrilled that we have this network, Women in Energy, that is jointly supported by the Energy Department and the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women in the Punjab government. A quick snapshot of our members. We're a growing network of over 120 female professionals in 3 cities. Our members range from women just entering the workforce at the peak of their careers, or those looking to transition into a new line of work. And these are women currently working in the field of energy in Pakistan, including solar, wind, thermal, energy efficiency, sustainable urban planning, green buildings, climate change, etc. So shout out to all of you. I'll give the e-floor back to you, Ramlana.
Thank you so much. I cannot really imagine how much we've grown from just the time that we met to already. This is really phenomenal. And I'm really looking forward to more collaborations down the road, specifically for 2019, because I think now is the time to talk about energy use, to talk about conservation, to talk about environmental implications of, our habits when it comes to policy making regarding energy as well. Let's switch to Dr. Jordan. Thank you so much once again for being here with us. Let me just tell you a little bit about our audience space. We have, like Namira mentioned, we have women professionals specifically within the field of energy and policy joining in at the moment. And this webinar, since this is a live stream, this will be aired on as a post stream as well later on, and will be recorded at, I believe it is going to be recorded at the WEP website for future use. But Namira, we can always share these videos, the recorded videos, over with you as well if you want to keep this for future records. Apart from the energy professionals, we also have a lot of student base. Now, these students are interested in higher research, and they are also catalysts for the future. So they're looking for problem statements and also solutions to it. And I think that is right up your alley. I think I did not do justice to the topic when I was introducing it, so I would hand over the floor to you. So please go ahead with the conversation.
Thank you so much. And you certainly did a wonderful job. So thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm just going to set up sharing my screen now. Is that working? Does it show up correctly?
It does, yes.
Okay, excellent. So
Although I think we, for some reason, are seeing both.
so you're
views.
seeing, okay, so it
Right.
means that you're seeing the presenter view.
Correct.
All right, let me see display settings. Okay. Hide presenter view. Does that work?
Perfect, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so as mentioned by Ramla, hang on, I'll just minimize us there as well. So as mentioned by Ramla, I'll be speaking about about global natural gas, the recent market evolution and the changes in the sector, but also natural gas is a fuel that has numerous end uses. So I will then transition into discussing the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions implications specific to the power sector, which is one of the end uses. In essence, right now we are entering a new era. This is particularly noticeable in the United States, where approximately 10 years ago, there was actually activity moving towards importing natural gas rather than exporting natural gas. But with the recent shale boom in North America and an abundant supply across the world, global and regional markets are changing. Just to give you an idea about what this looks like, even the global natural gas demand is expected to grow 1.6% per year to 2023. And this is owing mostly to industrial uses, but a large part to the power sector, which has been a large contributor to the lower emissions in the United States in recent years. In essence, the coal to gas transition has resulted in lower emissions. So there's a lot of interest to see whether or not there can be actually a positive impact elsewhere from increasing LNG trade, which is actually forecasted to rise from 1/3 to almost 40% during this time horizon. With these changes, though, there are not just implications for the end use. There's the full natural gas supply chain leading up to the end use. So there are implications for this. The questions then become, what exactly are these implications? In addition, there's increasing attention on the fugitive methane emissions, particularly here in North America, but there's still similar challenges everywhere that natural gas is produced. But the goal of this particular seminar will be to examine the evolution of global natural gas markets and to uncover the emissions implications of increasing export from the US and Canada to the rest of the world with a focus on power generation. Pardon?
Hello? I think we had,
Shall I
that's
continue?
fine. Yes, please do.
Okay, so to give a quick idea of the market evolution, in essence, from a historic perspective and from the broadest sense, there are 3 separate markets, and these have different pricing structures. So one is hub pricing, so more of a spot price type of market. Certainly futures involved. The other is oil-linked pricing and a mixture of oil-linked pricing and hub. And the other is when the natural gas prices are directly linked to oil. But as there is increasing LNG trade, in essence, this starts to connect these disparate markets. And we've seen quite a bit of changes in the overall outlook on and history in natural gas prices. So what you'll see in this figure 1, that's from one of my recent publications, postdoctoral fellow Dr. Adebola Kusumu. So he was the lead author. So in essence, what this shows is the 3 different different prices all looking to start to converge in recent years. Now, these data are presently being updated, but you can see the general trend. And in addition, you start to see specific landed prices start to jump to different markets. So that green, which crosses the markets, that is Mexico, where there was a pipeline bottleneck. So as a result, it jumped up to Asian prices because they were looking to import more. And as a result, the Asian prices were still recovering from the demand shock from Fukushima. So these changes appear to be reflective of increased market connectivity, the overabundance we see as prices start to drop in more recent years, but also the recovery from a shock, and the shock being the demand shock from post-Fukushima. So when Fukushima happened, nuclear plants closed, and then there was a large new demand for LNG import. To give you an idea of our historic perception on global imports and outports or exports, this map in essence shows the landscape in 2014. So you'll see that the United States, so what's gray is importers and what's blue is exporters. So the traditional view here, even here in US and Canada, was that the US was an importer and actually served as a large market for Canada, but this very quickly changed as natural gas production in the United States increased. Coming from the publication that I have with Tim Boersma, he's a scholar at Columbia, we discussed this at length, and I said, hey, you know, there's no way that we are looking towards a new world where the United States will be actually exporting, and now we're actually seeing that imports are actually dropping, and for the first time in 2017, the US exported more natural gas than it imported. So this is a huge change for the United States. What you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide are the import and export plants here in North America. So you can see how the change is actually affecting the development of these terminals. So historically, you can see that the existing import facilities are at 16. But there's not very many that are being proposed or approved, whereas the existing export facilities are presently 2, but a very large amount being proposed and in the pre-filing stage and approved. And this is these are data that I put together, I believe, last year, so they've probably changed somewhat, but it gives you a flavor for how quickly things have changed. So now bringing us back to what the emissions implications are. Life cycle assessment is in essence a cradle to grave assessment. We're going to be looking at greenhouse gas emissions, but you can look at a large suite of different environmental impacts. There are a variety of different methods. We'll be looking at process life cycle assessment. So that in essence looks across the different processes involved with liquefied natural gas export. So this little diagram gives you an idea for what the general framework would look like. You would assess the environmental impacts, the environmental burdens of products and processes from cradle to grave. So from materials extraction through processing, manufacture, use, and waste management. And it also allows you to account for reuse, remanufacture, and recycle, depending on the processes that you look at. Just to give you an idea, there is a difference certainly between supply chain management and LCA. So LCA typically includes the end use. You can shape the system's boundaries so it's less, but it typically includes the use phase. So you can imagine that just to give you an idea, if I say life cycle assessment is one thing and fuel cycle or the supply chain would be more looking at the upstream rather than including the end use. So what in essence does this new expansion in LNG export look like? Well, what you'll see on the left-hand side is domestic use. So this gives you an idea of what the supply chain looks like. Producing wells, you go through pipelines to processing facilities, then through transmission lines. There are compressor stations which increase the pressure and enable the natural gas to flow. There are different points along the supply chain where there's storage to enable the natural gas component of the supply chain to respond to different demands. The natural gas can be used in power plants. It can go through the city gate where it can be used in a variety of different reasons or a variety of different end uses. If you look at LNG export, however, it has the same upstream supply chain component, so all the way up to end use, but it has this additional component where you go through the midstream infrastructure, but there's liquefaction, and then there's ocean transport and regasification, and then natural gas distribution on the importing side, and then through end use, which could be a variety of different uses from home heating to industrial to power sector. When we start to look at the life cycle of different power generation technologies, one thing to really highlight is the fact that natural gas actually emits a lot less than coal in general. Okay, so historically, this is what we found. I'll talk a little bit about the uncertainty in upstream emissions shortly, but this is a review that was done by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. You can see the count of estimates on the bottom, so the number of studies that were reviewed by the NREL. And in general, natural gas is on the order of 50% less of emissions in comparison to coal. So this has been a big deal in terms of the overall emissions from the life cycle and the changes in the power sector in the United States, thus bringing questions about what this might mean abroad. Now, the key challenge with the vast majority of studies is that they compare directly to coal. And coal, even if you don't account for the upstream component, if you're just looking plant to plant, new plants, natural gas is 50 to 60% lower emitting. So that's not including the life cycle. But you see similar trends if you include the upstream. So myself and my collaborators, this is an article I published with James Coleman based on the work that we did with Adebola and our students. What we in essence did was we looked at liquefied natural gas export from British Columbia, and we compared it to a number of different countries or potential markets that we identified in a large-scale market review. So who might be interested in importing? And then we compared what the life cycle emissions of BC LNG look like if combusted for power generation looks like in comparison to the markets that we identified. We identified 3 countries where emissions reductions were likely: China, India, and Taiwan. Now, Japan was more complicated. And this really highlights the questions of what, in essence, you're comparing to. So pre and post Fukushima. So post Fukushima, you can see that there are emissions benefits. And the key reason why is because during the time that the nuclear facilities were closed down, there was a lot more oil that was being burned. So that became the marginal fuel per se. So the marginal being what would be the next source of power that would be used in order to meet the demand. However, if you compare it to a nuclear fleet, there's actually an increase in emissions if BC LNG is used in comparison to that electricity generation mix. So what we really wanted to highlight is that it really matters what you assume is going to happen on the side of the importing nation. What we then did is we decided to take a little bit more of a rigorous look into the country level infrastructure assumptions in the importing nations. At this point, Pakistan was not identified as a potential market. So there's a lot of work that can be done by all of you there in Pakistan to look at the potential impacts on LNG and on the power supply there. But what we did note was that in general, if you start to include the country level infrastructure, and the 2 things that we included here were country level efficiency, so the efficiency of the generation fleet in the country, in addition to transmission and distribution losses. And what we found was that if you include these additional factors, you can have quite variable results across countries. If you start to look at, this is specifically for the LNG, the natural gas combustion in each of the countries, so not comparing to other sources, and natural gas combusted, so LNG combusted in the specific countries for electricity generation. Now, you'll note, for example, that India, due to high transmission and distribution losses, is actually much higher than the rest, for example. So quite important to note, but those would be reflected in the other generation sources as well. But the infrastructure and efficiency of the generation fleet matter. On the right panel, you'll see that we also examined what it would look like if the natural gas was combusted in the United States without LNG export, and with a brand new best-in-class natural gas turbine. We used an efficiency of 55%, a GE turbine or a combined cycle plant. So you'll see that the emissions can be quite a bit lower, and actually even using best-in-class technology matters. So that's something clearly that would matter in terms of adding additional capacity in different countries. So the T&D losses in the power plant efficiency really drive variabilities across countries. We then decided to take a little bit more of a rigorous look into emissions displacement. So what, in essence, do we assume is being displaced in the importing country? We decided to look at a number of different displacement scenarios. So this, again, is asking the question, should we always be assuming that it's coal? So we said, well, what is the counterfactual? What would be burned otherwise? Well, you could look, for example, at the electricity mix cross-section. So that would be taking a slice of what's being combusted in the country at that time. You could assume that you would displace dispatchable electricity. So that's what can be turned on and off to meet the changing electricity demands. Or last, you could say, okay, well, you could also assume you're going to be building new plants, such as I understand is happening in Pakistan right now. And you would assume that it would be displacing what would have otherwise been built. For example, would it have otherwise been coal? What we did to take a deeper look into this question was we said, okay, well, let's take the most promising markets and look more in detail into these markets. So we chose 5 case studies based on 3 factors: landed natural gas prices, the potential for demand growth, and market size. Now, they did happen to be primarily coal burning countries, but those happen to be the most promising markets. So they are the 5 largest importers in the Asia Pacific region: China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. These represent 75% of global LNG imports, Japan being a main importer. And in terms of China and India, these are really viewed as potential increases in demand that have been previously forecasted into the future. So these two figures show the results of our study, or of our analysis of scenarios. So what you'll see on the left-hand panel is the 2014 electricity generation mix, or 2010 electricity generation mix. And you'll see that in general, so a number of the countries are predominantly coal generators. So that's the yellow component. And so what's yellow is coal, the blue is nuclear, the orange is hydro, the darker blue is oil, and the darkest blue is other renewables, and the green is natural gas. Okay, so that gives you an idea for the fact that a lot of these, a number of these countries, especially China and India, are viewed as higher coal generation. So the emissions do depend on what's being displaced. So the figure 5, the figure on the right-hand side, show what the emissions displacement scenarios look like. So the whole mix electricity, dispatchable electricity, and marginal electricity assumptions are shown. And in general, we actually found that for these specific countries, that there is actually a decrease in emissions. So what this in essence, but there is changes, and also the exogenous variables actually matter a lot. So what I mean by exogenous would be unexpected events that are out of that wouldn't normally necessarily be predicted. So that would have been the Fukushima disaster. So because of that, there were changes, as previously mentioned, in Japanese electric sector, which means that there is a difference between 2010 and 2012 in terms of the overall impact of increasing LNG import for power generation in that particular country. So I just wanted to highlight again the differences in results. So what we did was look at a variety of different scenarios. So quite quickly, any industry will gravitate towards selecting specific numbers that might better suit their different arguments. But we actually looked at this because we consider it quite uncertain. So I wanted to highlight these different results because first, we don't know exactly where the LNG might end up, particularly because this was at the point there has been a final investment decision in Canada for that particular plant from British Columbia, and there are plants being built and that are exporting here in the United States. But there is a lot of uncertainty whether or not the displacement will actually occur. In addition, I want to highlight the fact that the plummeting cost of renewables might change our assumption of what exactly marginal electricity is over time. So for this case, we actually assumed marginal electricity as the largest source of electricity generation in the specific country. So the decisions based on economics in the past will be the same in the future. But if renewable energy continues to drop in prices like it has been, the marginal assumptions may change. So bringing us back to the supply chain. There's been a lot of discussion in the scientific community here in North America regarding the fugitive and methane emissions. So those are the methane emissions that are escaping from the supply chain. And so that's including the upstream, not all the way to end use. So we're assuming at this point that the end use would be in the importing nation. So I worked with a number of different scientists, and we came out with a study that showed, after reviewing 20 years of literature on the topic, that atmospheric studies consistently suggest that the government reported emissions are actually less than what's measured. So the measured emissions are approximately 1.5 times those reported by the Environmental Protection Agency. So this brings a lot of questions. I mean, could it be possible that some of the studies coming out being published saying that there are not large benefits from a coal to gas transition, could they actually be correct? What we found is that measurements do show that official inventories are consistently underestimating the actual methane emissions. But there are a small number of super emitters which could be responsible for a large fraction of the leakage, the methane leaks. So there are a number of different well-known cases of this evening. There was a facility in California where there was a large plume leaking for a number of months. So this can create challenges. But what we did find is that the atmospheric studies with very high emissions rates are unlikely to be representative of the typical natural gas systems leakage rates. And if you're looking at a 100-year global warming potential, so that's assuming you're looking to quantify a CO2 equivalent over 100 years, that the system-wide leakage is unlikely to negate the benefits for coal to natural gas substitution. But if you look under shorter timescales, for example, 20 years, that may not be the case. We did conclude, however, and I firmly state this, that there is not enough public knowledge to actually confirm exactly what the emissions are. There was a recent study that came out in Science in 2018 by Alvarez et al., and they noted 2015 emissions were 60% greater than what is reported by the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, so really confirming that they could be higher. Now, mind you, the 2015 is just before new regulations were put in place, and also it's just 1 year. So it becomes challenging. Can we say that's true of 2020? That's where it becomes a real challenge, particularly with a large, expansive natural gas pipeline infrastructure system. Now, there has been a lot of emphasis on measurement, and measurement is extremely important, particularly for identifying these super emitters. But there can also, what I would argue is there can also be an overestimation or an overemphasis on measurement, and estimation can still play a complementary role to measurement, because there's been a lot of discussion about how to reconcile these atmospheric top-down emissions with the bottom-up engineering style estimates. So what I did with my collaborators was we in essence took a sample of 1,633 natural gas wells in the United States and Canada across different plays, across different natural gas producing regions. And what you'll see is that we actually, using specific assumptions, you'll note in the left-hand panel, the blue box shows our estimation using 3 days, assuming 3 days of emissions, is actually very close to what the measurement studies show. So this is completion emissions. So when a natural gas well is drilled, there's a period of time where the natural gas is emitted before it's connected to a pipeline into the natural gas production system. But there are mitigation technologies. There are ways to reduce these emissions. And so we then looked at what the economic implications of using these mitigation technologies or technologies that can reduce emissions. We looked at what the economic implications are. So if you look at the two right-hand panels, what this shows is the REC is reduced emissions completion. So that means it's a mitigation technologies that's applied to reduce the emissions. And what we found was, including the costs of the mitigation technology, but the revenue from selling the captured methane, is that in general, there is actually positive economics for applying this mitigation technology. So in many cases, if you have emissions from the natural gas supply chain, it can actually be profitable to reduce the emissions. In conclusion, there is a lot left to discover related to the development of interregional and international life cycle assessment, particularly for the case of liquefied natural gas, because it's a rapidly evolving sector, as you can see in Pakistan with the recent developments. Importantly to this discussion, infrastructure and end uses in the importing countries are presently not well accounted for. So in our study, for example, we did not look at the natural gas distribution infrastructure in the importing nations because that information is not readily accessible. There are also questions that remain regarding the magnitude and management of fugitive emissions or methane leaking across the natural gas supply chain, and sometimes released for safety and operational purposes on purpose. So there are a lot of questions regarding how large these emissions are and how to manage them. But we do see that there are cases where the economics can be favorable if they are managed. Next, comprehensive spatial temporal data sets are really needed to work towards developing more robust and comprehensive life cycle assessments. And this can count for infrastructure changes in the exporting side, but also the importing side. The overall implications of LNG trade are still unclear because the global growth of the energy sector still means that there could be increased emissions regardless. But that's a different question than life cycle emissions. We do find, however, that our study suggests that there are emissions benefits, but noting that the changing economics of renewables may change the overall picture. The impacts of LNG growth to different end uses are really in need of more comprehensive analysis, in particular industrial. So I wanted to end there and this is hopefully getting you thinking about questions related to Pakistan, but also the evolving sector globally. I'm very much looking forward to your questions. I actually mirror the excitement of my hosts because I've been very much looking forward to speaking with all of you in Pakistan. And I'm very much looking forward to your questions. So there's my collaborators are noted here. I just wanted to highlight Dr. Adebola Kasumu, who is a postdoctoral researcher with a PhD in chemical engineering who worked with me at the University of Calgary. And also a number of different students I've mentioned, James Coleman, also Gian Liendo, who is a graduate student in political science, and Vivian Lee, who's an engineer from MIT, and my several other collaborators. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. This was immensely educational. What really stood out to me is when you said that, as we can see, that India really stands out, and I was thinking, okay, we share a lot of culture with India, so we're probably around the same range, and I think it's imperative at this point to gather data and to really create reports that can be worked upon for better policy. Thank you so much for sharing this knowledge. I am currently scanning through the comments that we have. A lot of people have really praised you and have really thanked you for your time and have mentioned thank you for collaborating with us as well. I don't have any technical questions at the moment, but we can wait because I think there is maybe like a 2-minute lag between what we're talking about right now and between the live streaming. So I think, Namira, in the meanwhile, you can probably go ahead and steer the conversation forward, steer the discussion in the direction of energy and women.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what some of our members would be interested in knowing is twofold, and I'll say both of those questions in one go, and you can decide however you want to answer them. So related to the technical side, what we're interested in is that there are 3 large RLNG-based power plants of approximately 3,600 megawatt capacity being installed in Punjab region, either by the Punjab government itself or by the federal government. And the infrastructure is in place to support import of 9 million tons of LNG per annum. Out of this, 1,100 megawatt has been installed through Harbin and General Electric in Bhikki, near Lahore, and it's operational and connected to the grid. So all of this has been happening very recently in the last 2-3 years. So, and interestingly, some of our members have been part of their respective companies involved. So I'm sure they'd be interested to hear more on this topic. In your opinion, what are we missing from the present conversation in installing power plants to meet the rising demand and meet the gap that Pakistan had regarding life cycle greenhouse emissions? Because this is missing in the conversation, and we'd like to hear more on it from you. The second question is related to gender, and especially, as a woman in the energy sector, we'd love to know your career trajectory and any advice that you have for younger professionals entering the field. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Namira. These are really wonderful questions, actually. So yeah, it's quite incredible the speed at which this sector is developing. So I was actually, when we were talking about topics, I was very excited to hear that there are developments happening in your country, because it does increase the relevance of the research. Now, you will note that we did not look at Pakistan. So I think first, there's a lot of room to develop a more comprehensive life cycle assessment of what these facilities will look like, specific to your country. Now, in terms of what potentially could be missing, what we noted in our research, there are a couple of things. So we used country level averages in terms of power plant efficiency. And if you're installing these new facilities, that could mean that, for example, that you have higher levels, it's combined cycle, natural gas turbines, and they're very high efficiency. That could show additional benefits that may not be shown. Now, the gaps, on the other hand, are the importing facility and distribution infrastructure. We have not found a lot of information on that in terms of what the potential intentional or unintentional leaks might look like. So those questions are still quite prominent, and I suspect they will become more important. Another thing to note, now there are a couple of different sides. One real benefit to natural gas is the fact that it has fast ramp ups and ramp downs and can respond to the intermittency of renewables. So that's another key benefit, keeping an eye to the potential synergies with more cleaner technologies. But that said, I do have colleagues at MIT who have recently come out saying the ramp ups and ramp downs can create additional challenges in terms of increased emissions. So to keep all of these things in mind, it's really a fastly moving picture in terms of our knowledge of the changing power sector. So I'm also very excited that there are people in the companies that are potentially on the call, because I do think these are very relevant questions, and you could probably come out with some very interesting results based on these new developments, particularly because they are new capacity. In terms of gender and career trajectory, so as you know, I come from a physics background, so that was my first degree. I became very interested in the energy sector in my doctorate. So I was really delighted to have the opportunity to still continue doing a lot of quantitative analysis. So for those engineers and specialists in energy, I would like to encourage all the women out there. It's a lot of fun. You become more comfortable presenting with the numbers and all this kind of thing. So I encourage you to keep at it, because it's really a wonderful field to be in. It's very exciting. In terms of being about the challenges in gender, I'm going to give one key piece of advice, and that's to always focus on the material. So no matter what, if you produce good work, that's going to be a very important component, and nobody can take that away from you. Nothing can happen. Just continue to produce good work. Focus on the research, focus on the analysis, your talent, how you can share this, how you can contribute. So that is my primary recommendation, is to focus on the research and analysis, and no matter what challenges that you may face, always continue to work hard and to produce good results, and that will always shine through.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. We have one question, and it's on a link that I shared, so it's not directly on the page at this point, but that's fine. So the person is asking that, as an engineer who uses EPRI guidelines a lot, I would like it if I can have a bit more background about these things. I am not sure exactly what the EPRI guidelines.
Is that the Electric Power Research Institute?
I think so.
And then I'm not entirely sure what guidelines that are being referred to. Can you ask the person for a little bit more? Is there anything any clarifying information?
I can ask that for sure. But let's see. Okay. Can you clarify a bit, please? I think we can come back to this question. In the meanwhile, Namira, if you have any other thing. Namira?
Hi, sorry, I think there's a lag. I think one other topic or one other question that we'd be interested in asking is, what made you decide to stick to academia as opposed to, being in a more sort of a practical application of what you've been studying and building your expertise in?
Thanks. That's actually also a really great question. So starting off with the academic component, I actually really enjoy freedom to explore different ideas and being creative. So while it's been a challenge at times, no particular sector comes without its challenges, but it does allow for academic freedom, and that really enables a researcher to be able to ask questions and to answer them within an environment where you're not, being as directed or told the outcome. So that's been a really wonderful experience. Actually, even at the Electric Power Research Institute, I had a wonderful experience there. So I was working in the shale gas revolution, and the study on the shale gas boom, here in the United States, and looking at the comparison between coal and if there were economic and environmental trade-offs that the industry should be aware of. And even that was really interesting. But while the EPRI was a great opportunity, I actually really, really wanted to continue mentoring and to help teach and to not only just for the academic freedom, but to help mentor young people. And I had a wonderful experience at Harvard too. So I had the opportunity to work with the Harvard graduate students in Harvard graduate women in science and engineering, and had a fantastic time there working with young women in science and in engineering. But I also work with a lot of men in science and engineering and in policy and economics. So to be quite honest, it's just been enormously rewarding to help other people learn about the field and to work with scholars, but definitely students, and help them better understand the things that I've been fortunate to learn in my career.
And I understand that you're also a part of the Women in Energy in USA or DC. How has that been as an experience for you?
Oh, it's been an excellent experience. That was another thing that I was really delighted to see, that there was a Women in Energy Pakistan. So it was a group that I became very quickly involved with when I landed here in DC. It has been, so I work with their board. And what I've actually found is it's an excellent way to find additional mentorship. I mean, mentorship is a really big challenge for women, not only in the academic profession, but across the energy sector. So it's been a wonderful way to offer mentorship and to receive mentorship, because there are women from in very senior ranks at the executive level all the way to just recently graduated students who are very junior in their field. So it offers a really wonderful way to help support women in one of the key areas where they lack mentor, in comparison to what men receive. So it's been very rewarding, and I've been meeting such excellent people. So I was very excited to see Pakistan is doing similar things, because it just offers a really incredible opportunity for women to advance in their fields.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very useful. Ramla, back to you.
Yeah, for the students listening in, which is a lot of people, like I mentioned at the start of the webinar as well, a lot of people are looking into applying for higher education at this point. The problem is a general lack of awareness about these niche areas that are the necessity of research for, especially for Pakistan. What do you suggest for students, let's say in undergrad at this point, who are looking to specialize into such topics, but are not really aware of which direction to steer into?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And to be quite honest with you, it was actually really only as I started my doctorate that I started to really figure out what I wanted to do. I think there are some people who immediately, when they're 5 years old, they know they want to be a medical doctor, and that's what but a lot of people, I mean, myself included, it was really figuring out which field I was most excited about and that I found most rewarding. So my largest piece of advice would be to really I think attending webinars like this is really important. So it could be, someone saying, hey, I think life cycle assessment is interesting, but I would rather focus in renewables, or I want to, wow, this economic component is interesting, or maybe through discussing this, I've decided that I wanted to work in, just policy or whatever, but I think really getting out there, learning as much as you can, attending what events you can. I mean, this technology that we have these days that we didn't have 20 years ago is phenomenal. The fact that we're even holding this webinar, I thought was actually very exciting. I've done a lot of domestic North American webinars, but international webinars, I mean, this is a really wonderful opportunity. So I think, joining professional networks, associations, finding what information is available. There's a lot of new online resources as well. So a lot of online courses. Even Harvard offers some actually at no cost. So you can go and explore different topics and learn more about them. And there's, MIT, and even some of my seminars at Hopkins are available online. So right now we have so much technology at our fingertips that we can actually learn more about specific topics using these technologies. So I encourage exploring and being open, because you might find that you end up in an unexpected area. I, at one point, thought I was going to end up more focused on ecosystems management and wildlife management. And then I steered back towards energy and found that there was this really great use for my physics degree, and it was very exciting. So staying open to opportunities is important, because even if one door closes, another door might open very wide, and you'll find a whole new topic that you never thought you would be interested in. So be open, use the resources that we have to access as much information as we can, and definitely get out and speak with people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. The great part about technology today is that we've already reached 1,074 people, and about 121 of these have actively engaged with us for throughout the duration of this webinar. So the reach is just exponential. Once again, thank you so much. We're almost running out of time. So I'd like to wrap up this immensely educational webinar. Namira, would you like to have some closing remarks?
Again, this has been a very exciting collaboration, tripartite collaboration between the three networks and organizations. And I think I just want to say and let everybody know that Ramla and I have more collaborative webinars in store for you through the course of this year. So keep a lookout. And not only just webinars, but we're thinking of collaborating in other ways as well. So it'll be an exciting exciting year for sure.
Absolutely. A lot of on-ground collaborations coming up. So stay tuned for 2019 because this is going to be a very, very exciting year for both Women Engineers Pakistan and I'm sure for women in energy as well. Once again, Dr. Jordan, thank you so much for your time, for your guidance, for your directions. If there are other questions relevant and if there's somebody really, really interested, then I will send you the questions that we get. So we'll keep you looped in for a while in case there are other questions. With that, thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been really amazing to just see the reach possible for education and knowledge. And that really drives me, that really drives Women Engineers Pakistan to keep doing these things. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Khuda Hafiz.